So Brian Plum. Brian Plum, we're so very happy to have you with us today. The Wayside Inn is something I think that we all dearly love. But, in fact, you probably wouldn't be here if you didn't love it. But Brian loved it so much that he wrote a book about it, which I dare say the rest of us have not done. Brian is a member of the Sudbury Ancient Fife and Drum Company, which performs at the Wayside Inn every Wednesday. And so you're there every Wednesday, just about. And we've also seen you marching in the July 4th parade and the Memorial Day parades. So we're so looking forward to hearing your stories about the Wayside Inn and seeing photographs that you've brought. So here's our speaker, Brian Plum.
Testing. Is that all right? Okay. I thought what I would do today is give you more of just a slide presentation of some interesting old photographs, but I'll step into that through two other things I'd like to discuss with you, if it's okay. One is the process of actually writing a book, and I'll be brief about that, but I just thought it was interesting. The other thing is just to give you a little bit of a background on the Howe family, because I think once you start looking at the photographs, you kind of need to see the context of the timeline and how it all fits together. So this is the book that, if you haven't bought it, I've got tons of them here, and I'm not selling them. I don't really care about selling books. I really cared about writing the book, but the books are for sale, and half the profits go to the Wayside Inn. So here's the cover, and that came from this 1871 lithograph image that I found buried in the Wayside Inn archives, which came from this picture right here, which is an 1870 picture by Thomas Hill that's owned by the Wayside Inn. It's hanging in the Wayside Inn. And this is the picture I actually sent to the editors for you get to pick out what the cover looks like, or so they tell you. And they rejected that picture, this picture here, and they went back to this picture, and they actually put the title on the book, and you know, I had really no say in it at all. It was just the way it goes. In fact, it's just very briefly about the process. You know, you have this idea, and I think, you know, my opportunity was there, and it was. I mean, any of you guys could have written this book. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and saw an opportunity, and just did it before anybody else could do it, I guess, right? And you put together the proposal, you send it to a couple of book publishers to see if they're interested. A couple of them get back to you, you kind of do a little bit of negotiation. And I wound up going with this company called the History Press, because I saw a lot of their books in Barnes & Nobles, and I just thought that they did a pretty nice job laying out the books, cover design, and just the speed to which they produce this thing, and it doesn't take, you know, years. The book started really in, you know, as I mentioned in my somewhere in the book. I mean, I've been researching the Wayside Inn for years, and I started this website, and I started just dumping information on this website because I started collecting it. I didn't have a place to put it. But the book started really, somebody just told me, you know, you got enough information here, why don't you write a book? And I'm like, well, that's not a bad idea. So started like in February, and I wrote from February to end of August is just a writing process. But it wasn't just the writing process, it was all the research, you know, scanning like 700 pictures and cleaning them up, and captions underneath the pictures, and then going through a proofreading process with a number of proofreaders and arguing with them because they see things a little bit differently than you do. And it's just a very time-consuming process. But, you know, at the end, you know, the book got produced on time, and you know, I think yeah, I haven't found any gross mistakes in it yet. There's a couple of typos, but I've done some subsequent research to check a few things. This past summer, I was at Henry Ford's Greenfield Village out in Michigan, and I spent 3 days in the archives out there just to make sure that I didn't miss anything important. And unfortunately, I didn't. There's a couple of things that the story was a little bit different, but I think I captured everything. So I think I captured everything correctly in the book. And I think there's a couple of people who really pushed hard on me to make sure that I just didn't make stuff up, and I researched facts. And just because you read something and something that was written in 1920 doesn't mean it's right. And one of them was Lee Swanson, and the other one was Richard Ganatowski, who was the miller at the inn. They really helped out a lot, just making sure that when I said something, I was as accurate as I could possibly be when I was writing it. So back to this. Here's the website. I haven't really done much on it since I wrote the book. I just haven't had time. Samuel had David. David's the guy who built the Wayside Inn. Roughly around 1702 is when we believe he built his home there. 1716 is when the inn formally got its innkeeping license. So we have that date and time. And then David's son Ezekiel took over during the Revolutionary War, and then Adam Howe took over, and then Lyman Howe took over. And we'll also have pictures of these guys, and we can talk about them in a little bit more detail. And then there was a period after Lyman died that a bunch of interesting things happened. And the most interesting thing, of course, is Longfellow visited the inn in 1862, and that was the start of the inn becoming really famous. But it was also a period of tenant occupancy, and there were 3 families that were in the inn at the time, consecutively in the inn at the time. I covered that in as all the detail I could find on that period in the book. And then after that period, there was a brief period of about 4 years that 2 local owners bought the Wayside Inn, Homer Rogers and Herbert Howe. And Homer Rogers owned his family owned all of the industry down in South Sudbury, the mill down there, and all of a lot of the manufacturing down there. And Herbert Howe was a businessman in Marlborough, and he became the first mayor of Marlborough. And the story is that they heard that the inn was going to be turned into a quote-unquote a roadhouse, and they didn't want that to happen, so they took it over for a short time period until Edward Lemon, took it over in 1897, and he owned it from 1897 until Henry Ford took it over in 1923. E.R. Lemon died in 1919, so his wife had it for the last few years. So Henry Ford, we all know that part of it. We can go into more detail on that through the photographs. He owned it until 1945, roughly speaking. He turned it into a nonprofit trust. He turned the inn and the grist mill and the area surrounding the inn into the trust in 1944, and then the rest of his 3,000 acres came to the trust in 1945. And then the inn started selling off pieces because they needed to, after Henry Ford left and, the stipend that he was providing went away, they had to start, it was an expensive place to run, so they had to start selling property to keep it going. And then there was the period after Henry Ford had it where it, went into this trust, and then this trust had it for, the trust still owns it now, but, there was an initial period. There was a couple landlords involved that, there's probably 4 or 5 names mentioned, but the most significant part of that period is the fire that occurred in 1955, in December 1955. And then after the fire, the inn was reconstructed, as you probably remember, in like 1955 to 1957, 58. And then Frank Copice, who everybody here probably knows and loves, he took it over and he ran it for 30 years. And that was like 20 years ago that he left. And so it's been running with a couple other innkeepers for the last 20 years. And I got to know the inn at the very tail end of the Frank Copice era, because I remember going over there for a business lunch once, and I remember Frank came out and gave a presentation. He wore his colonial garb, and he had his sword, and he pulled his sword out, and he started giving the history of the Wayside Inn, and I was fascinated by him and by the inn. And then I kind of went to bed for a while, and I didn't think about the Wayside Inn for years, because I live a couple towns over in Hopkinton, so it's pretty easy to get here, but it's not right next door for me. And then the last 2 innkeepers, Bob Purrington and John Cowden, who's the current innkeeper, took it over, and there's a number of changes that they made that I outline in the book. John, of course, is responsible for the new renovations, or the front walk, the front walk that they did in the patio, and I'm sort of a purist when it comes to the Wayside Inn, and I kind of like it the way it was. And I thought that I would never step foot on that patio, but I love it. It's a great feature. They did a great job building it, and it's a wonderful place to sit and have a cocktail, on an autumn afternoon. So, yes. No. Those are the deed transfer dates is what I'm showing there. That's not birth dates. I apologize for being a little confusing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that early date is, and I mentioned a bit of this in the book. The early sign that E.R. Lemon first hung up, which is the Red Horse sign that we kind of know now, that certainly wasn't original to the inn, nor was the date on it. He had painted on it 1686, I think, or 1686, and it's just nobody could figure out where that date came from. There's no basis in history to that date. And there's a couple of close dates to it. One is when Samuel actually got the first Indian deed to the property. That was in 1684, which is roughly close to 1686. So let me show you the next slide, which is, this is the, by the way, John Howe, the guy, the very, very top of the slide, John Howe, and I just did a cursory explanation of him. He was, not only did he help found Sudbury, he also was the first settler of Marlborough, and he owned the first inn in Marlborough, the first innkeeper in Marlborough. So he actually lived here, and this is not his house, but this is a house on his property. This is on 29 Fowler Street, which, if you know where the hockey rink is, it's kind of behind the hockey rink in that area of Marlborough. It's said that there's some of the original chestnut beams from John's house maybe in this house. It's a beautiful house stuck on the end of a short dead end road, but the house still exists. And I stopped by their house a few times to talk to them, and I could just never hook up with these folks. But here's the get this a little bit bigger here. Just going back through the family tree quickly. So and it kind of works this way. So John had Samuel, Samuel had David, David had Ezekiel, Ezekiel had Adam, Adam had Lyman. But all these other folks, they come up in history as well. You see. You see a number of these names pop up, like John's children. John, he had this John here was killed in 1676 during King Philip's War, and then he had a number of daughters that were captured by Indians, as did Samuel's kids. There was a couple of them here that were captured by Indians. This guy here, Nehemiah, was captured by Indians, dragged up to Quebec, and he actually wrote a book about it that is in the Marlborough Library. And one of the interesting connections I found going through the archives is the connection between Sudbury and Hopkinton. And what I found is, and I'll just go through this quickly. I'm not sure how interested you guys are, but Samuel had a child. This guy right here is John. So John actually was the first person to settle in my town, Hopkinton. So just like his grandfather, John was the first settler of another town here in Hopkinton, and the house he lives in is it's been identified, and it's going to be part of our 300-year centennial in a couple of years, next year actually. And the other interesting connection on the Hopkinton side is that's what these yellow things are. All these folks here, Martha moved to Hopkinton. David, who built the Wayside Inn, his daughter, Thankful, actually married Samuel's son, Peter. I know this gets complicated, but so Samuel didn't actually move to Hopkinton. He got land in Hopkinton. He gave it to his son, Peter. And if you know Hopkinton, there's a big reservoir there, and it was right where the reservoir is. But Peter married Thankful, and they had 10 kids, and one of their 10 kids was a person named Phineas, and one of their kids was Abigail, and Abigail married John Young, and one of their kids was Brigham Young, who was one of the founders of the Mormon tradition. So there's kind of a Howe family connection to the whole Mormon faith. And this, maybe you've seen this map before. This is the map that's in Chilton Powell's our Puritan village, and it shows there's this 2-mile extension in Sudbury, the new grants in Sudbury, and a number of them were split up. And the Wayside Inn site is the site down here on the bottom where it says T. King. And what I was interested to see exactly where that was when I saw this, and I built another map here, and you can kind of see it over here on the side. The grant that belonged to Thomas King that Samuel Howe bought. So here's the old Boston Post Road kind of veers off this way, of course, and it goes in front of the Wayside Inn. And certainly the Cardin Mill is not original. That was built by Henry Ford. And I'm sure most of you guys know the landscape here in Sudbury better than my other audiences. But the road split here in Wayland, and it came up this way, and this is the old Indian Trail coming down this way. Oops, went too fast. And this is Lee showing me some of the Indian grinding stones in Knobscott. There's a whole bunch of old stones out there that have the carve out that supposedly were used by Indians. This is right if you know where the middle of the Knobscott Reservation is. It's right below this big cabin they have up there, Liberty Cabin or something like that. In these photographs, paintings actually are thought to be Adam Howe and his wife Jerusha Howe. And you may have heard of Jerusha Howe, but the Jerusha you know of course, is the daughter of this Jerusha Howe. And these haven't been authenticated, but they exist in the archives. They were given to the Wayside Inn in 1958, and they were said to be Adam Howe and Jerusha Howe. And Lee tells me they used to be hanging in the Wayside Inn, along with the third picture, which was their daughter, Jerusha Howe, but apparently that got stolen. So, and this, of course, is Lyman Howe, and you may have seen this picture before. This is the last landlord who died in 1861. Probably in the innkeeper's room. There's two places he could have passed away in the inn, and I don't know why I was fixated on this, but he did live in the innkeeper's room for a while, and everything I read led to believe that was his bedroom. When I went out to the Greenfield Village archives, I found a history written by somebody that it's sort of a fanciful history, but she mentions that his bedroom was the front room upstairs, which was used to be the Edison room. It's the drivers and drovers room now, and that was possibly his bedroom at that time as well. And that a long time ago, that was a Howe bedroom. But I mean, like every old house through the years, these rooms are kind of moved around, and they were used for various activities through the years. And that's Herbert Howe and Homer Rogers that owned it in for the short period of time. Interesting picture that you have here in the archives showing the Wayside Inn right there in the middle. This is the road to Framingham. There's a sign on the street that says Framingham this way. And this is looking in from Route 20, looking down at the inn, so looking north, and you can see how close the barns were to the Wayside Inn. This little structure right here still exists. This is the old Red Horse Spring, and if you're there on the site, you see this little, structure that looks like that. It's empty. It's just used for storage. But a long time ago, that was a very famous spring for natural spring water that. You can see old advertisements at the Wayside Inn that say, "Come to the Wayside Inn for its spring water," and this is where it was pulled from. There, this is probably probably a cow barn and a carriage barn. One of the very first pictures ever on record of the Wayside Inn, probably 1860. sometime before 1868, so maybe 1866 or so, because we do have a photograph of 1868 that shows a little bit of construction around the doorway here. But here you can see it doesn't look like you can see it all that well, but it shows the old tree here that original sign used to hang off of. It's hard to see on the screen there, but here it shows the old stone bridge and the one of the barns that doesn't exist anymore that was built in the 1880s across the street here. That I believe this barn was actually moved to the parking lot area, and then this barn here, parts of this barn were taken and moved and turned, and that's what became the barn that we know right now. Hello. The barn that's up there right now, all we know about its date is that there's an inscription on one of the plates that says 1825 on it. So, similar picture. You kind of see the old sloping back of the inn here, and there's an outhouse, in the back corner here, in this photograph as well. And a little picture looking at the bridge. There's a series of about 10 of these stereo pics in the Wayside Inn, and I took a lot. These are all high quality images, and I scanned them at 600 dpi and enlarged them, and I used a few of them in a book, like this one, for example. And it's much nicer on my screen than up here, but you can see a fair amount of the detail. This is probably, you can see all the foliage on the tree. Probably the oldest, or one of the oldest, but probably the oldest photograph that I know of the Wayside Inn. And it's probably, like I said, about 1866-ish time period. And then looking at it from the other side, and then walking up the street with a dog. This actually reminds me of this other. All the pictures that I have up here now, I put them into another book that I use this picture as a cover picture, and I've offered this to the Wayside Inn to sell as a fundraiser, because I know that there's a couple of initiatives underway right now. So, if anybody's interested in these photos, hopefully the whole book will be available for sale at some point in the near future. This was said to be the oldest picture, but I don't think it was, because you can see there's been some work around the door there. And interesting picture that if you scroll in, you look at people's faces, you can just imagine what they were looking at. Sometime after 1874, because you can see the telephone pole in the background there. And this is one of the Sudbury Historical Society photographs. I use it in the book. You can see, it's hard to see, but I just love these old pictures of the old the buggies and the horse carriages that are there. Interesting photo here, because you can see kind of like the tip of the barn in that corner there, so you can kind of see where the barn was in relationship to the Wayside Inn. So it's right there in that, right now there's like a grassy area. So it must have been right there on the, as you're walking up on the front walkway, it must have been right to the right is where, a large horse barn was located. And some swings. And this is the canvas awning era. This is about the time that Herbert Howe and Homer Rogers owned it. They started to do some work to clean it up, to fix it up a little bit. I believe that they're the ones that added this awning. And then the awning came down. You'll see some later photographs, because when E.R. Lemon took it over, he did some other changes to the Wayside Inn, like this. He built this. In 1897, his first year, he built this portico off the front of the inn, and a couple of dormers off the top of the front there. He hung the sign up. He changed the old well to the old pump to a well. And then this flagpole I've only found in two photographs, and I think it's 1901 or 1902 that I identified this image too. There's some old you can see it in the picture better, but there's some old vehicles in the front here as well. Yeah, this is a pretty interesting photograph, and it's very clear. And these are 1904 electric Studebakers, and if you look closely at this here, I probably shouldn't have done that. Well, shouldn't have done that, I guess. But this is actually, it says electric hydrant on it. So it's an electric vehicle charging station that was located at the Wayside Inn. And I zoomed in on this, and I looked down at the ground just to see, if it was really, bolted in, if it was real. And there's nothing about it in any of the archives. We looked exhaustively. But when I went out to the archives in Greenfield Village, I found a similar picture, but the charging station was moved to the front of the inn. So I think it's just a set photo. Maybe they brought it out. I think maybe they brought the charging station out. It's probably got some battery in it, right? They brought it out for this Photoshop, and they put it there to charge the cars up, and then moved it or something. I don't know. But it's kind of interesting that electric vehicles, which are coming back, were once here at the Wayside Inn. In that same picture, but you don't see it in this picture. This old tree, that old tree you can see in a lot of old photographs, and it's just this wiry old tree that I don't know when it came down. The inn was painted yellow at one point in time. You've probably seen this photograph. There's thousands of these photographs on eBay, these postcards. And that's E.R. Lemon. He built the little portico in the front. There's something interesting in this photo. Can any of you guys tell me what it is? Yeah, you see this this face on the side here. I found this image buried in the archives in some little snapshot book, and they were all real high quality images. But I thought that was kind of interesting. This person's checking the camera to make sure they're getting a good shot. It's hard to see, but another E.R. Lemon era photograph. Of course, this is moved in 1904. They moved this and connected it to the side of the old kitchen that became the Ford room, which was furnished by 1908. And then this is the old post road here in front of the inn, and this is probably the new post road that E.R. Lemon was responsible for. The road got moved twice. It was, as most of you guys know, the post road is right in front of the inn, and then E.R. Lemon moved it away from the inn, like in 1899, and then Henry Ford moved it up the hill, in 1920, 27 or so. Can't remember. Another interesting photograph of showing buggies, but what I found interesting about this, and I probably can't do it here, but if you dig in there, there's a bunch of like motorcycles in underneath the trees here, and it's interesting, back then, which is sometime after 1897, 1899 is when this light was hung up. Yeah, and you can't tell if the flagpole's there. So about 1899, somebody was actually driving motorcycles out there to the Wayside Inn. I'm not sure if you can see this all that well, but this is the back of the Wayside Inn before the carting mill pond was created. So you have this big hay meadow back here. And, a couple of these buildings, this building right here is probably the outhouse. And there used to be a door in the old kitchen, in the back of the old kitchen, and you'd exit from that door, and, one way was to the woodshed, and one way was to the outhouse. And they didn't have indoor plumbing until probably E.R. Lemon, there's a plan that shows him creating the first bathrooms at the Wayside Inn right behind where the current hostess desk is. That's where the bathrooms, the first bathrooms were. But I think there was an earlier bathroom that was in the old kitchen. And if you're in the old kitchen and you see that closet just to the left of the fireplace, that was the first bathroom in the Wayside Inn. It was either at the end of the Homer the Homer Rogers period, or just at the beginning of the E.R. Lemon period, which is 1897. So 1896, I think indoor plumbing came to the world, around 1895, 1896, and so they were early to convert. And this is the somewhat famously written about the brick kitchen, which you don't even know exists anymore because it's completely buried by the rest of the dining room in the back, because the whole dining room sticks out the back. But this was a big deal when E.R. Lemon built this. Another photo showing the just kind of showing how peaceful it used to look back before 1904. And then Henry Ford took over, and Henry Ford and all of his famous friends showed up. This is Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, and Harvey Firestone sitting in the old kitchen, making it look like they're reading books, but there's like 3 or 4 of these pictures, so it's all set photos, But it's interesting to stand. You can stand right, where Henry Ford was sitting, and just kind of, I guess you can't feel his presence, but just know that he was in that room. And that there's the bathroom right there behind him, and there's a door here. This is the exit to the exterior of the building. And the grist mill, of course, that we all know and love. And here's the grist mill before they put the wheel on. Interesting thing is that when they first put the grist mill wheel on, it started the wheel, the shaft started to buckle, so they had to dig it out and put another wheel in. And this is the grist mill being built. And there's probably some interesting stories I can relate to you on this, but I don't think we're going to have enough time to get into the details on these outbuildings. This is, and if you can see it, this is the original mill site on the mill dam itself. And of course, you guys all know Henry Ford built that, the grist mill that we know, starting in 1925, and it got finished Thanksgiving Day 1929. But before that, there was this existing mill site that was on the mill dam, and there were a number of buildings there. You can kind of see them here. This over here is where the raceway is going to the existing grist mill. So right about where the discharges of the mill is where the old intake was for this mill. And this mill was, thought to have been built roughly 1727 time period, and I've got some documentation I give in the book on that. But it was a grist mill at one point. It was a corn mill. The last use of it was a shoe nail and tack factory. So they're actually making little metal tacks. And there's a photo that exists in the Wayside Inn archives of the inside of the mill, just the machinery to make the tacks. And this is the mill site looking from, looking north, from the little hill there that's completely covered by vegetation now. But there's a number of mill buildings right on the mill dam there. And across the street, doesn't exist anymore, was the old David Howe homestead. So, when David Howe, going back to our original chart, built the Wayside Inn, he also built the grist mill site. And then David's son, David, who was brother of Ezekiel Howe, who took over the inn, David got the mill property. Ezekiel got the inn. It's funny though when you look at the you look at the wills in some of the documentation of the Wayside Inn back then. It's not even listed as an inn or a tavern or the Red Horse Tavern or anything like that. It's just listed as a homestead. And I don't know why, but that's what I found. But across the street, Henry Ford, when he built it, when he took over, he turned that into one of the buildings of the boys' school, and then it burned down. It had 2 fires in 1944 and 1947. And if you've ever walked that property, and that's the property that's for sale right now, but if you walk the property, you get in the back of it, and there's like a circular cave in the ground, and that was an old pump, and there's photos that exist of the old pump that used to be hanging above that. It was a windmill. There was a windmill up above that. And here's another picture of the old grist mill, or the old mill. And this is what Henry Ford. We believe that's what this photo is. Henry Ford taking it down, his people taking it down. And here's the house again. This road still kind of exists. You see the remnants of that on the property, near the mill dam. This building here we think is a slaughterhouse. It's listed on an old map as slaughterhouse. So, be interesting to. This of course is the old post road. So this would be right across the mill dam is where the slaughterhouse was. And that's Henry Ford, just before the Henry Ford era, because they used to be called the Bright Mansions, or there's a wealthy, Sudbury residents called the Bright family. They owned it. And this is the flood. You can see just the floodwaters going over the mill. And the Hunt Club that was there. This is the interesting photo. When I first saw it, I thought it was the 1800 ballroom, the room that everybody knows above. You go upstairs and you see that big row. It's not. This is actually that space that is now occupied by the guest rooms. And Henry Ford built that as a big dance floor. And that's what these people are doing there. They're dancing. And you've probably heard these stories before, but there's documentation of it, of him actually putting leaf springs from cars underneath the floorboards. And so when they were dancing here, the floor had a little bit of strength to it. And that's Thomas Edison donated this brand new phonograph that he just invented with his records, and they were at the Wayside Inn. So I'm not sure what happened to them, but I wish they were still around. And just a nice picture of the old garden, hand-colored. You can't see it, but you can, over here is another barn that I believe was right on the backside of the parking lot. And I think it might have been the barn because the cupola is the same as the one that I showed you earlier. It may have been the barn that was, the big one that was across the street. And then it subsequently burned down at some point, like after 1917 it burned down. And then this is the portico that E.R. Lemon started to build around the house. And when the fire, when the place burned down, they decided not to rebuild the porch. Henry Ford actually did some major exterior work in 1938 and uncovered the front of the inn. And you can kind of see, maybe not very clearly, but there's like two, you can see this line right here of two structures. So it's believed, there's a couple of things that I relay in the book of why it's believed that this front room here was like the original part of the Wayside Inn. Although there is some speculation, uncertainty, I guess is a better word, of how old the old kitchen was, because the old kitchen, is clearly a very, very old structure. There's no documentation whatsoever when the old kitchen was built. I mean, not a word about it. And if you go down in the basement at a Wayside Inn underneath the old kitchen, and there's this huge fire, base of a fireplace down there. That all the logs are above you. It's just a very old structure. And I'll go through the rest of these real quickly because I know you can just get so many photographs of the Wayside Inn in you. And then this the post road. This is looking east, of course. Some of the old trees that were written about many times and photographed and described. The one in the front is the Longfellow oak, and the one on the other side of the street in the back is the lemon oak. The gatehouse that we know is right next to it, right here. But they used to have large openings, and then people used to get a kick out of going inside these big trees. And then there's the fire. There's a 1,000 photographs of the fire in the Wayside Inn archives. There's just so many you can't even go through them all. Because they took pictures of the fire, and they took pictures post-fire as well. The day after. And Lee was telling me that him and his dad were there the morning that this occurred, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but the story was something like they went and they took these benches and they took the benches and stuck them in front of the door so nobody can kind of go inside. Then he went home to they lived in the country store, went home to get some rope to kind of cordon it off. by the time they got back, somebody had already broken in and cut all there was some, expensive, rare, Paul Revere etchings, in the tap room, and a whole bunch of other artwork. Somebody came in and just stole it all the morning of the fire. So it's floating around somewhere, somebody's house. This is the old archives. After the fire, they took the archives and put them into a bank. I always wondered what's in that box and if it still exists. And this is the rebuilding, which is kind of interesting to see the old cars that they, 1956, 57 time period. And it's, all post and beam construction. This is the tap room. So you're standing kind of at the fireplace in the tap room, looking, out towards the post road. So the only thing that's original is the beam above, and the memories and everything else. And that's the bar. You can see some of the bar was still original. 1924 Model A, destroyed by a fire in the old kitchen, replaced by this one. That's Henry Ford's kids, grandkids, I should say, Benson Ford and Henry Ford the second, in the back of the fire truck. And then this is the fire truck that 1964, the inn gave it away when they got the fire protection system there. I don't know if it still exists. It was given to the fire department here, I think, in Sudbury. An old map showing, interestingly, it shows, Adam Howe's hotel here, in the Buckley House grist mill. And then you've got the Southwest School, that still exists over there on Peakham Road. And then Adam Howe, you guys know this, that big white house on the hill just to the east of the Wayside Inn. That was Adam Howe Jr.'s house. So Adam Howe is the landlord. He had the two kids, Lyman and Adam Jr., along with Jerusha and a couple other kids. But Adam Howe Jr. bought this house, and I provide a story about that in a book if you're interested. And then this is David Howe, or I think it's David Howe. This is a house on the other side of Knobscott Reservation. You see the ruins there now. And then, of course, there's the Ezekiel Howe Jr. house, which is not on the map, but that's around here somewhere. I don't know, something interesting. This is Lyman House. This is the last landlords. This account book actually exists in the Wayside Inn archives, and it shows, this is Lyman Howe's signature here. Here's Lyman Howe writing a ledger statement here to Professor Daniel Treadwell, who, if you know the story of the Tales of the Wayside Inn, Daniel Treadwell was the theologian. He was one of the characters in the Tales of the Wayside Inn. In fact, it was Treadwell who used to come out here in summer at the Wayside Inn back, in the 1850 time period. And Treadwell found a place, and he had all his buddies from Harvard University come out to spend the summer with him. It was Treadwell, then there was the Luigi Monti, the Sicilian. He used to come out here. And these guys used to all go back to Cambridge and talk to Longfellow and just tell him stories about the summers and about the inn, and that's how Longfellow starting to get an inspiration for his book. You may hear that the fans of Jerusha Howe exist, and Jerusha, the daughter, who there's stories of her room over there, room 9 in the Wayside Inn, and I heard these stories about Jerusha Howe's fans existing. They came to the archives of the Wayside Inn in 1995, and this is what they look like. I kind of wanted to see what they look like, so I didn't know if anybody else did, but that's what they look like. So there's the fans, and then there's a painting in the parlor that she supposedly created that's hanging there that belongs to her. And then her room, and then her sitting room was the room when you walk into the Wayside Inn, and you got the parlor on the left, and then right behind it is the dining room. But that used to be the old Howe sitting room, and that was sort of the living room for the Howe family, and that's where she spent most of her time, in that room. And this is her grave in the Wadsworth Cemetery. In fact, these are all of the Howe family graves, right? So you've got, this is Jerusha's gravestone, and then you've got Adam Howe and Jerusha, the parents here, and then you got Lyman Howe here, and then Adam Howe, and then his wife Olive Page, or Adam Howe, Olive Howe. They're here as well, and a couple other Howes back here, which I haven't quite identified those. And then Ezekiel's grave is right behind us in the cemetery here. And it's interesting that, right next to Ezekiel Howe are I can't remember their names, Rebecca, they were the two of the, Adam Howe, who had Lyman, and Adam Howe Jr. and Jerusha. There were two other kids who died when they were young, and they're both buried next to Ezekiel Howe here in the cemetery behind us. And Longfellow, of course. This is a glass painting that used to hang in a Wayside Inn and got destroyed, but Longfellow cites this in his poem. And these are supposedly violins of Ole Bull, the musician in the Tales of the Wayside Inn. And they were collected by either Lemon or Ford. And they were conserved after the fire. They were rescued from the fire and they were conserved. This is E.R. Lemon right here. There's very few photographs of him. I was able to get two from the archives in Greenfield Village. I used one of them in the book. And this is the Washington passed by this place tablet that was. This is actually they moved it not too long ago, because I kind of vaguely remember it being on a roadway, on a blacktop roadway, and that's the dedication ceremony in 1914. And just an advertisement for the inn. And you can't see it, but that's the dapper Mr. Lemon standing in front of the Wayside Inn. There's a better picture of him in the book. That's me in the archives down at Columbia Point, down in Boston. Going through I was going through some of the old maps and records and innkeeper licenses, and what I have in my hand is the actual application that David Howe put in 1716. And I'm touching it by the edges. It's on cardboard, so I'm not really actually handling it. But that's the actual application that he put in to get his innkeeper license at the Wayside Inn. And I was talking to the curator there at the archives, and I said, how significant this is? And she's like, you've seen one old document and you've seen them all. And I'm like, Kevin, I had a heart attack when I first saw this. I couldn't believe I actually found it. I knew it existed, but I couldn't believe I found it. And there it is. All of the you can go back on a microfilm, and it's a very tedious process, but you can go back on a microfilm and you can track all the old innkeeper licenses all the way back up to like Lyman Howe. I couldn't find Lyman's innkeeper license. Lee looked for it here. I couldn't find it here in the town hall, so it kind of stopped at Adam Howe. And you guys, this is for people who don't know how close it is to Framingham and Marlborough, but this is the inn here. Newton is listed here, so this is after it passed into the aunt's family. Newton was the daughter. And the old sign, supposedly, is a fanciful design. And that's a sign that was put up by E.R. Lemon. And you've seen the bust. But I show this because what I find interesting about this, if you kind of look where he's looking, you see scribbled in or scratched into the arm there. It says Edward R. Lemon, 1897 or something like that. So if you're there looking at it, you should take a look at it. And there's another vestige of the Lemon period at the Wayside Inn that caught my eye. It's when you're sitting on the patio and you see the door to the old kitchen area, and you look at the door knocker, and it says Lemon on it, which comes from the old days. And this bust, of course, was a copy of the one that's in Westminster Abbey in London, which I saw, and then more of Henry Ford and his friends sitting in the tap room. I like sitting there myself. This is you can't see it, but I'll just bring it to your attention just so you know it exists. It's a big map that it's in the Greenfield Village archives. And it's the one thing I wanted to see when I went out there, but when I got out there, they couldn't find it. So, but I had a photograph of it. Somebody gave me a photograph of it. In fact, they sent it to our archives, 1998, I think. So it's in the archives, and you can if you're interested in seeing it, you can go to the archives, and you can blow it up. I dare not do it here because I'll probably have a problem with the video. But you can see the Wayside Inn here, and you can see a plan that Henry Ford may have had in 1926 to build like a story town kind of village here. Of course, he built the Wayside Inn, but then he started on a bunch of other things. The year after he didn't build the Wayside Inn, but he bought the Wayside Inn. But in 1923 he bought the Wayside Inn. In 1924 he bought the Botsford Tavern, which is this tavern in the Detroit area. That he restored that, and he started rebuilding that. Then he started Greenfield Village in 1929, and that became his passion. So everything. All of his, and I documented every time he was at the Wayside Inn. So as best as I can, I've been able to figure out, when he was at the Wayside Inn, and he was there probably 3 or 4 times a year in the first few years. But then there's a couple of years he wasn't even there, and then at the end he was there once a year or so, because he just got distracted by everything else, including World War II and the issues with the Ford Motor Company. But it's an interesting map that. A surprise to see. And this is a kind of an interesting map because you can see the extent of the Henry Ford holdings, almost 3,000 acres, that went all the way to the top of the Knobscot Fire Tower. And here's Ford's Folly back in the woods there on Brimstone, in the Southwest School, and where the train station was up here, off of Dutton Road here. And he owned all the way over just to the left of the Hager, that white house on Route 20, the Hager House. Oops. And just an aerial view showing what it looked like without the carding mill pond. And then the cooling plant, which is located right here. So you can see he built a road across here to bring his vegetables and produce here. And this big underground structure is a cooling cellar that he processed the vegetables there. He made relishes, he made vinegar, he pressed apples, and then this is the cider mill over on the other side. And there was an elevator that came up out of the ground over here, and presumably just to take product into the old cider mill. And the cider mill now is a wreck, and there's an initiative underway to restore the cider mill, which is kind of what I hope this book does, is brings them some money to get the cider mill restored. And then some more of Henry Ford with its, dozens of carriages. I mean, the Wayside Inn archives are filled with carriage photos. And that's not, you can't see it all that well, but it's an interesting photo coming up the Post Road in the old bridge. That bridge doesn't exist anymore, but it's right outside of the cooling plant. And the Eustis coach that the Inn gave away in 1995, I wish they kept it. And then Henry Ford's coach, which the Inn still owns. They restored it in 1974, I think, and they repainted it all, and they used it for a mail run from New Hampshire down to the Wayside Inn. But it wasn't being taken care of all that well, I understand, at the Wayside Inn. So they gave it to the what's that museum up in Stowe, the Carling Museum, Collings Foundation, right? So hopefully it's only there temporarily, and the Inn can someday get it back. Cider press that was behind the barn. The old Wayside Inn steam shovel. They used this to build the carding mill pond dam, and they used it to build the tunnel underneath Route 20, and they used this to build the Ford's Folly over on the other side. And the carding mill pond never did have a wheel on it, and that's one of the things I wanted to research at Greenfield Village, and I found the documentation going to correspondence going back between Campsell and Ford. Campsell was his personal secretary, and they sent Ford the plans, and that's the end of the trail. That Ford got the plans for the wheel, and I guess he just decided not to spend the money, because there's a couple of other old interesting documents in the Wayside Inn. You find these like correspondences from the chief, who was in Dearborn, sending these notes to the locals here saying, start cutting back, and he he went into this full force, and then he just started pulling back a little bit at a time. And I think that's probably what happened. Decided not to finish it. And that's what the inside used to look like. And so here's the so you're looking east, because here's the covered area, or the doorway here. And it was a machine shop for the boys' school. And this is the cider mill back in its good old days. And that's what it looks like now. Some of the old carriages are still in there. Another picture. And that's the front of the cooling plant. And that's building the cooling plant. When you look in the cooling plant, you see these like the pillars that are holding up the ceiling. Those are actual ventilation shafts, so the air would come in from the bottom and vent up through the top. And there's screen grates and rocks on top of it, so nobody falls in right now. But there's a plan to restore all of that. And that's an old blueprint I found of what it used to look like. So here's the entrance by the grist mill, and that area that you see when you peek in there, that was the old canning area. And there was a concrete floor down there, and there was a wall up, and that was really the processing area. The rest of it was all storage, and the press that is here in this picture still exists. If you look in there, you can see this old rusted press still in there. And over here, they had this mushroom culturing area, so they used to culture mushrooms down there as well. And then you have the elevator down here and a ventilation shaft over here. Yeah, there's the press. That still exists. I have this picture in the book. I thought it was kind of an interesting picture. And then the general store, of course. And the chapel being built. The outhouse. I don't know if you guys, it's the smallest building in the Wayside Inn property. That Go look at it now, because it ain't going to last much longer. It's in pretty bad shape. And hopefully, that's probably easy enough to restore that. And that's the dam at Ford's Folly. And there's a whole story on that I relay in the book. And there's a couple of interesting photographs of building the dam. I mean, just a massive construction project just to move all these big rocks back there. And it's the only time the retention pond was ever filled, I'm told. This picture right here, which I think you gave a presentation on this, God, about 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember this photo, and I said, I got to get this photo. So, and then the ice house pond, and the ice house in the back, and then this is moving the gatehouse, because Lemon built it like in the front of the property, and Ford didn't like it. He thought it was too close, so Ford had it moved across the street. And that's that's the country store, split in half and dragged over there by ox and rebuilt. There is, if you're interested in doing some just a lot of fun research, but the inn has the hostess diaries. And when Ford had the inn, Clara Ford insisted that they have a record of every day's activities at the Wayside Inn. So they took, and they would send this stuff back to Clara regularly, and she would take great interest in knowing what was going on at the inn, which is kind of nice to know that she was focused on that. And they spent a lot of time putting photographs in these things. And the inn has, as far as I know, they have every one of them. So if anybody wants to do some research, just go back there and and page through some of these old things. It's all electronic too, so you can talk to the archivist. I'm sure there's a way to get to them. I wish they did that now, just record what was going on there at the end, because I think, 50 years from now, people probably want to know what's going on today. 4-H picnic, when Ford bought the inn in 1923, he had this big party in February 1924 that just excited and pissed off all of the locals, because none of them were invited. The only people who were invited were like all his friends, and he had his security guard walking around the property so nobody could even come close. So he felt the outrage, and so what he started doing is he started hosting these 4-H picnics, on the field across the way where we have our Colonial Fair now. And for years, there's posters of it going on for years. That we'd have all the kids, the local kids, and I guess members of the 4-H club and families come and have a picnic there. It's just, I don't know, it's an interesting photo. Henry Ford donated this vehicle to this Mr. Meeker, Elijah Meeker, because he was one of the ones who actually hiked the Oregon Trail back in the day. This is one of my idols, John von Schaech. I'm probably mispronouncing him, but he wrote a book in 1939, and I found his photograph in the Hostess Diaries, and I saw this picture, and I can't believe it. I get to, cross paths with this guy. But he wrote a book in 1939. He was a Unitarian minister, and he was a member of this group called the Fratters, who every January had been coming to the inn, and apparently they still do come to the inn. And you can see a sign in the old kitchen that's a dedication to them. And I personally don't like all those signs and stuff that they have going around at the Wayside Inn, but it's my purism, I guess. But there's a sign to them, and he was the editor of their magazine. He's a minister, but he wrote a book in 1939 called "The Characters in the Tales of the Wayside Inn." And if you haven't seen this book and you're interested in the Wayside Inn, this is sort of a must-have book in your collection. And you can get it on, Amazon used books for like $15. And he goes through and he spends a lot of time going back and looking at the history of the story about all of the characters. There are 7 characters in the Tales of a Wayside Inn. And he goes back and he pulls all the research together. And he does a great job. And he used as the basis of his history in the Wayside Inn, which he starts a book with, in 1897, History of the Wayside Inn, that was done by Samuel Bent. That I have it on my howtower.com website. You can find it. If you look hard enough, you can find it in other places on the inn. But Bent did this history for the Society of Colonial Wars, and he gave this speech at the Wayside Inn. And that was the history of the Wayside Inn that every magazine writer and everybody until Allison Ridley and Curtis Garfield did their book in 1988. And he used that history. And then the Knobscott Tea Cottage, which was an old tavern, which was attached to the Hager House on the other side of the mill pond, on the Marlborough side of the line. And it was moved here. It's been for sale for about 3 years. I think they're asking like $850,000 or something for it. It's a beautiful house. I mean, if it wasn't on a main street, I would have bought it. And then it's just some Model A's across the street. And then this is the Adam Howe Jr. house that's up on the hill. Interesting thing about this photograph is if you look at the roof line, you can see that this is new construction. So this whole front of the house with the pillars in the second story over here, that's all new construction. It wasn't like that when Adam Howe had the house. And this is the Ezekiel Howe Jr. house, which most of you guys probably know. Tony House, he lives in this house. And I was able to find a bunch of old photographs of this house in the Greenfield Village archives. And then Henry Ford's tap room. All these pictures are stolen. The gun was stolen. The table still exists. It's got an interesting story about this table. It's odd that it's just there to be used, but Henry Ford got this from an antique dealer in Sudbury. Supposedly, it's a circa 1674 table that when the fire occurred, it burned, but everything was so cold and the ice melted, and it kind of put this big, 2-inch thick layer of ice on this table and a couple other things, so that it was actually, preserved through the fire. And then they restored it, and it's still being used out there. Every once in a while, I catch myself putting my foot up on it. I'm like, oh, what am I doing? Because it's easy to kind of lay back and just think it's just like any old table, but it's it's an antique. Another one of my heroes here is Priscilla Staples, and she was the hostess at the Wayside Inn back at the Ford era, and she did a lot of the groundwork for research that it's in the archives right now. There's a bunch of old magazine articles from magazines that don't even exist anymore, and they I can't find them on the internet. And I've gone to the Boston Public Library, and she was able to find these magazine articles and transcribe them all. So she did a lot of great research, and she was a real driving force back in those days. And here you see von Schaik's book being sold. Here's Tales of the Characters of the Wayside. That was the book that was, being sold at the Wayside Inn at the time. That's multiple copies right there. And then the keys. And this was the old, of course, during the Henry Ford era, as well as the Lemon era before Henry Ford, it was a dry inn. There was no alcohol served. And the whole back of the inn didn't really exist either. Henry Ford built the north wing, but that whole area, the hostess area, that's all new. That was built. There was a smaller area there before. I still vaguely remember it. But this is the hostess desk back in the good old days. Interesting picture here. This is the Ford room back when E.R. Lemon turned it into a art gallery. So that's looking at it from one direction, and that's looking at it from the other direction. You can see, I think we all go over there and sit over here, and we just love that little area in the back there. And then the ballroom again, and the old dining room. This is the old tap room, the original tap room here. And this was this door doesn't exist anymore, but you used to go through this door down to the basement. And this is the door that they would use to come out. They would come out of the tap room, come over here, go down this door to the basement. The door is kind of in the hallway now. It's underneath the stairwell. But in the old days, this was a door down to the rum cellar. And it was underneath the parlor was the area that was at one point called the wine cellar or the rum cellar. Right underneath there now is like a workbench area, and it's sort of utility space for the employees. But I've spoken to the innkeeper. I thought what we should do is we should restore the rum cellar, and just have a way to get back down to downstairs and make it like a sort of special function room. It'd be kind of interesting to have there still. And then back when I first started coming to the Wayside Inn, this was the telephone booth, and before that it was it's where the cigarette machine used to be located. Back when everybody had cigarettes with their dinner. And if you haven't seen the attic of the inn before, that's what it looks like before anything is put into it. But now it's like filled with stuff. You can't see much. But what they did do is that they built into the frame of the original structure. So that's just part of the historic preservation of it. And there's a lot of interesting old stories of the attic that I put them all in a book about it being, where the slave quarters were, and it was the grain room. So there's a lot of interesting material about that if you want to know more. Sort of the Victorian look of E.R. Lemon, and he actually put wallpapers over everything, and he put linoleum floor down. And Ford turned it a little bit back into a more colonial look. You can't see much there, but the old sign used to be hanging there. And that's Frank. And this is the fireplace at the west side of the tap room. And back in the old days, before my time, but back before 1992. 1992 is when they moved the tap room from the tap room to the old bar. So what we go in there now, and that very small room in the front, the tap room, which they serve alcohol, and we sit there and we socialize and then just enjoy the company, everybody's company. And that was just almost like a museum room back before 1992, and it was a sort of a staging area for people to go to before their dinner was ready, their table was ready. But the room that's called the tap room used to be the old bar area, and you can still see the remnants of the old bar there. And it's a great space. It's a big space, and I kind of wish it was the inn kind of reprogrammed that space to make it more of a bar room, because you kind of need the space. Although I love the current bar room, it was right now it's a dining area, a dark dining area, but I think you do more with it. And Frank's got this old vessel, and he's got a loggerhead in his hand, and you guys know the story. He's making flip, and he puts the heated loggerhead into the vessel. It froths up, and they drink this. And, I want to have this thing at the Wayside Inn someday, like a colonial drink night. We all get together, anybody's interested, and we make all these colonial recipes and just see what the stuff used to taste like sack and, what was some of the other ones, colonial rum. this is, you can't see it, but what's interesting about this picture, it says, there's a sign here, it says Red House Room Cocktails, because the original bar, I shouldn't say the original bar, but the first new generation bar at the Wayside Inn, so after the fire, they needed to, the inn needed to bring in some more income, so they said, you have to have a bar if you're serving dinner. So that if you go into the forward room, and there's like a little hostess area in the back of the forward room, that was the first bar of the reconstructed Wayside Inn. It was put in there in 1956 because that part of the Wayside Inn didn't burn down, so that was running before the rest of the Wayside Inn opened up. And so that was the Red House Room Cocktail Lounge. And Frank Kopais moved it, and that's Richard at the if you know Richard, he's got a story or two at the gristmill and the 2005 Wayside Inn. And I just want to leave you, I shouldn't transition that fast because my next book is on this old hotel, which is in Rhinebeck, New York. It's a circa 1766 hotel that I'm working on this book right now. But back to the Wayside Inn. That's my presentation. I hope I showed you something new that you haven't seen. I know a lot of you guys know the Wayside Inn more than any other audience I've ever had, so I hope I didn't misspeak. I hope I got my facts straight. But does anybody have any questions? Thanks. Oh yeah. All right. If I have questions, I have to hand you the microphone. So. Because we're microphone short here.
Thank you. I have a comment, and I think you may be aware of it, Brian. When Henry Ford sold off the land around the Wayside Inn, he sold it with deed restrictions which had expiration dates. They were it was 5-acre zoning, and the deed restrictions had expiration dates, and the deed restrictions were expiring in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and I went to town meeting in 1988 and presented an article to create the Wayside Inn Historic District, and it passed. Interestingly enough, well, it prevented at least 231 houses from being built around the Wayside Inn. And actually, it didn't sit well with some of my neighbors. But one of the things that was interesting is that the person who owned the Adam Howe house at that time was against the town meeting article. It's a different owner now.
I just was wondering, there's a room behind the tap room today, and before you go to the dining room, is that a kitchen?
That's the tap room.
No, behind where the waitresses come out. You can't see it from the tap room, but there's like a swinging door, and they go in there. And I noticed when we've been in the main dining room, the waiters come out from that end too. So I just wondered what was in that room. Now, today's tap room, right? It's called the upper kitchen? Okay.
We walk through there. Our fife and drum group walks through there every Wednesday night, on our way through the thing, and I can vouch that it's actually very clean and professionally run. But, yeah, Hal was asking about the ghost of Jerusha, and of course, the book wouldn't be complete unless I said something about that because it's pop culture, and that's it. I mean, it didn't, and everything that I could find out about that I cover in a book about when it was first, they first started talking about it like in the 1990s, and it wasn't even here during the Frank Kopais era, because Ann Kopais, a friend of mine, actually was one of the proofreaders on the book, and she's very close to the end. She's never even talked about it, So Frank left in 1989, so I mean the ghost stories didn't start until 1990, some point. Did you guys see that show on TV about the ghosts? God, that was embarrassing. Yes, Lydia.
I read a biography of Thomas Edison, and I was wondering if you can corroborate this, or maybe you covered in the book, that when Henry Ford and Thomas Edison and Harvey Firestone were together, that they were actually going to Worcester to hear Sigmund Freud speak at Clark University. Did not come up across that? Okay. Yeah. Right. Right. And that Harvey Firestone and Henry Ford were trying to get Thomas Edison to invent synthetic rubber because the demand for tires in vehicles was, yeah.
And that's why they were trying to do the, Ford got occupied, by Greenfield Village, by the coal ships he built, by the airplane division that he started, the tri-motor airplane division, but he also started the whole Fordlandia. They started in Florida. There was a plantation in Florida that they were going to, harvest rubber trees, but then they built this big Fordlandia thing down in Brazil that didn't go because of synthetic rubber was created, and they didn't need the real rubber anymore. Any more questions? Anybody? All right. Well, thanks everybody.